Hi, some people. I'm happy to welcome you at the 23rd On Product meetup that is today fully remote. I'm Alice, co-organizer of the On Product meetup since 2020, and as a full-time job, I'm a senior product manager at Project A. On Product is a bi-monthly meetup for product people in Berlin. Our goal is to build a living community of designers, product managers, developers, QA engineers, and product enthusiasts to share their knowledge, good practices, and know-how. We're continuously searching for speakers and hosts, so if you know somebody or would like to become a speaker at our meetup, please reach out to either Benjamin Bolland or myself via email or on LinkedIn. We'll be happy to talk to you. Also, feel free to join our community on meetup.com and follow us on LinkedIn for the updates regarding upcoming meetups, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. Today we have two great speakers, both from fully remote companies, Mike Bartlett, VP Product from Slide, and Luke Vella, Product Manager at Hodger. Mike, stage is yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hopefully some of you have seen the show and so know a little bit about it. If you haven't, it's on Netflix and it's a precursor to Breaking Bad. Anyway, I like when I like talking, I like a lot of TV shows and movies, and so I often try and bring a bit of that into my presentation. And so really I'm here to talk about effective communication for product teams. And I think the first clue is it doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like calls. It doesn't look like phones. It looks like something completely different. Just for a bit of background on me, I've been working in a remote environment for quite a long time now. I worked in my own startup prior to joining GitLab as a sort of hybrid remote team. So there was half the team in London and the other half of the team scattered around the world. And after joining GitLab, I learned really what remote looks like at scale, where I worked with over 1,000 people, completely remote, no office anywhere. And I think a lot of my learnings have really come from that experience. And now at Slides, we have a team of 20 something. We're growing a little bit at the moment, so I lose track of the exact number. And we are all remote, predominantly in Europe, but still, no offices. Everyone's scattered around, and we run a remote team. And so I'm a big believer in remote. I've kind of dedicated my career to communication tools that help enable remote. And so right now, it's kind of, I think, a really interesting time. This quote from Charles Dickens is, not only relevant to a lot that's going on in the world right now, but I feel it's very pertinent to what's happening with remote working, is that everyone's been forced into remote. And I think that's great for the future of remote. I think it's also very dangerous for the future of remote, because if you don't consciously do remote, and if you try and sort of reproduce the office in a remote environment, you're kind of doomed for failure. And so I just wanted to talk about some of the tips that we kind of do. I actually found it quite interesting, Alice, that you replicated a ceremony that you do in real life in this remote session, and I don't know how or well or not it worked for others. It felt a bit weird, and we even made the same mistake at Slides. We were supposed to have an off Slide where the whole team got together for a few days. And what we did is we tried to do it remotely, and it was an absolute nightmare where everyone was just on Zoom the entire time, and your head wanted to explode at the end, and it was a complete disaster. And we basically didn't really listen to our own advice in terms of not trying to reproduce the office inside the environment. Apologies if you have some entertaining noises in the background. That's my little boy. He is just over 1 year old. Right, so, before I get on to talk some of the tips, I just want to give you a bit of background and a bit of context for how we work. And so this is sort of inspiration for, me in terms of how I like to run teams, and inspiration for our company. And I think just painting some context on the team might just give you also an idea of where all of this is coming from. So firstly, a book by Marty Kagan called Inspired, which talks about sort of product teams, empowered product teams, and how they work, and this sort of holy trinity of product design and technology working together to create empowered product teams that aren't these little feature factories and can own their own agenda, own their own roadmap, own their own metrics. And that's really, really important to how we work. And so internally, we kind of are broken up into 2 or 3 squads. And those squads, they have product, they have design, they have technology, they own their roadmaps, and it's a really good, healthy combination of sort of top-down and bottom-up strategy setting and delivering on those roadmaps and those objectives. And that's really, really important for us. Second is Radical Candor. I assume a lot of people have read it. If you haven't, I think it's a great book of how to sort of just communicate in a clear and direct fashion without being overbearing. Similarly, we follow sort of some principles of Shape Up by Ryan Singer at Basecamp. And so we don't work in these sort of 2-week continual sprinting till the end of the world. We have 6-week sprints, or 6-week cycles, not sprints, with 2-week gaps in between them. And we work at quite a sustained pace, and it works really well for us. And if you haven't read this or seen anything on this, I'd thoroughly recommend you having a look at it. And then finally, reinventing organizations. And in particular, we're kind of looking a lot at what sort of the sort of concept of teal organizations, for teal companies, around self-management, about bringing your whole self to work, around companies being having an evolutionary purpose. And I really like the sort of metaphor of like organizations as living systems. And we're kind of sort of playing with this new concept internally at the moment, where we take sort of organizations as living systems like human beings, and human beings can practice mindfulness, and we're trying to really understand what mindfulness means as an organization. And this is really important around not being overly reactive, not being overwhelmed, being very present and very conscious about what we're doing all of the time. So, there's no great particular learnings over here. I just think this kind of maybe gives you a little bit of context in terms of how we think about our company, how we think about the way we work, because it's important in terms of, how we practice. And then finally, just to give you a sense of tooling that we use, and this is kind of in priority order. If I was to sort of if I was to give up tooling, I would give them up from the bottom, going up to the top. We use our own tool, and my purpose of this is not to be self-promotional, but we very much use our own tool. Slide is a tool for writing. It's a tool for allowing anyone in your team to contribute to information, to find it, to make it accessible, to discuss it, and it's really, really important. And I'll show you some screenshots of how we use it internally, just to sort of amplify what we do. Secondly is Loom. I'm in love with this tool. I think it's a great complement to writing. Is effectively asynchronous video, and I'll talk a little bit about how we use it later on. ClickUp is our task management system. You can insert your own one here. I'm no fan of any of them, but we use something for keeping track of tasks. Figma is really, really important to us as well, and it creates a collaborative environment where anyone can really jump into the designs and talk about them. We prefer to keep conversation in Figma and feedback in Figma rather than in Slack, and I'll come to that later as well. One of the things that we have, pretty much most people on the team have iPads, in particular in the design and product organization, and we'll use like remote whiteboarding tools, or even just Zoom. Actually, if you can plug it in and share your screen, or you can record your screen, works kind of really well, and this is really important to us. And then Zoom and Slack, we all know what they're like. And this is pretty much like how we communicate, like I said, in priority from top to bottom. So there's sort of 3 rules, and what I want to speak to you about today is the sort of 3 rules that we kind of try and live by. Is firstly written over verbal communication. Secondly is longer form over short form, and this is kind of nuanced, and I'll get into it a little bit. And then finally, there's sort of a trap behind too much written, too much long form, which is kind of too much waffling and not enough doing. And so finally, to underpin all of this, action over discussion. And these are the sort of 3 main things I'd like you to take away. And these are the 3 things I'll talk about and try and show you some examples of how we practice them. So I'm trying to be very practical in this presentation as well. Right, so written over verbal. Firstly, like internally, meetings are the devil. Writing can effectively replace most calls that you do. And we have people in our team at the moment whose partners are sort of being forced to work remotely, and they're on like 40 people conference calls, or like they're on calls all day, all the time, and this is just the wrong way to do things. You can certainly replace most calls, one-to-ones, group calls, with effective writing. Video calls, however, are still important, and they're really around building relationships between people. So we use them for our one-to-ones. We use them for sometimes team meetings where we actually don't really like make decisions in those team meetings. They're just really about bringing the team together and making sure the team like know what's happening in each other's lives, stuff like that. And I mentioned Loom. Like Loom for us is more important than Zoom if you do want to use non-verbal, if you do want to use verbal communication. So just a word on meetings. Like these are some of the reasons I really dislike meetings, and I'm sure you do too. Firstly, it's like they're based on presence. If you weren't there, like the meeting almost never happened. You were unable to participate, and so they're not really inclusive. If there's a reason why you couldn't be there, or if it was difficult to schedule, like you basically weren't represented, and that's really not an inclusional practice at all. Secondly, is you get people who are really good at meetings. They dominate meetings, they rule the meetings, the talkers rather than the contributors, the alphas in the room. And I don't think that's really healthy or really inclusional. Face it, no one really prepares. Like the agenda will go out 2 minutes before, and no one really ever follows up, and everyone then just sort of forgets about what was said or what happened. And as a result of that, generally spontaneity and groupthink will win rather than thoughtfulness. And these are just sort of some of the many reasons I dislike them. This is kind of what my general week looks like. And I try to color code all these things just to kind of give you a sense. The purple things are totally blocked out. Like no one can ever book them. Customers can't book them. No one can ever book them. I have my meeting published on Calendly, and I try and talk to as many customers as possible. And so the gaps are for them. The green ones are one-to-ones, which people either I report to or report to me. And the orange ones, or the yellow ones, are the ones that have more than one person in them. So that's it, just 3 of them. And like the one of them is every 2 weeks. The other one is kind of more social, and that's about it. And so we really try not to have many meetings at all. So what do we do then? Well, we replace meetings with documents. It's that simple. This is light. So this is something which in any other environment would have been 2 or 3 one-hour meetings with 2 to 3 people to decide the sort of composition of this growth squad that we're kind of investing in at the moment. And we're trying to understand the composition of the squad and who should be in it and so on and so forth. And actually the person who's leading it is very new to the company, and their very first instinct was to create a 1-hour meeting with 3 different people. And we're like, no, let's just write it down, discuss it in the documents. And I kind of used Loom in here to also just inject a sense of enthusiasm and passion around it, because I'm really passionate about the squad and I want to make sure it's done well. And so I kind of had a little 3-minute TLDR and then a bunch of writing on it. And this is what our typical sort of X meetings now look like. And they're just, it's really effective. If you must have meetings, number one, as few as possible. Secondly, is preparation is key. So we have, as you saw on my calendar, our weekly squad meeting on a Friday. Every Thursday, the document goes out to everyone with the agenda. It's filled in, it's populated, the conversation happens there. Like everything happens almost before the meeting, and the meeting is more just to bring people together. And if there's anything that kind of needs clarity, we will do it there. Otherwise, we try and do it all inside of the documents, and the decisions are made final in the document. So everyone in the company can see them, can search for them, can find them. It's pretty easy. So that's, I guess, written over verbal. Long form over short form. So longish form, longer form. And really, this is actually more about the same points that you saw in meetings for kind of Slack. And we try and not conduct conversation or discussion in Slack. We really try and use documents, or if you've got other tools like sort of thread-based tools. I can't remember the one by Todoist. It's escaping me now, but perfectly good tool for that. And this really, we try and encourage in our documents research and richness, and this makes them much easier to search and to reference than chat messages. And we also keep all of our documents open by default. So, if you compare Slack to meetings, it's kind of the same thing. It's, once again, based on presence. Even though chat can be asynchronous, let's face it, most of the time, it's completely synchronous. People will have the conversation there and then, and if you happen to be not there, if you're in a different time zone, you didn't contribute. It's not as much ruled by alphas and dominators, but maybe there's a little bit of that still happens. But again, like, nobody prepares or follows up for these spontaneous conversations. They sort of groupthink win, thoughtfulness loses, and we kind of feel they're very similar. So when we do use Slack, we use it for just quick updates, just telling people this is where I am at, this is what's going on, really kind of broadcasting. We do use it for some team building. We have like a water cooler and like some places that we'll share, cat gifts and stuff like that, and what people did over the weekend, and just trying to make sure that everyone's can stay in touch like that. And we use it for quick questions, but that's about it. There's like very little decision making or discussion that happens in Slack. We kind of feel it's a really, really dangerous tool for being able to effectively communicate as a team. And especially one-to-ones as well, like private conversations that are not in the open, really bad idea. So like a replacement kind of once again, and this is our product. I'm not trying to sort of promote it, but this is kind of what my sort of feed, if you like, looks like. And this is the one squad that I look after. And here you can see basically all of the stuff that's going on. It's kind of nicely, if you like, threaded, because each one of these things are documents rather than this sort of endless stream of conversation. And here you can see people working on release plans for the stuff that they're working on. You can see the planning document. You can see some specs being built out. You can see like a QA note that we've got. And like this kind of gives me a really good idea, an overview of what's happening. And then I can sort of dive into each one of these things. So for example, if I come and dive into the sort of QA notes, some people feel that they need to be face-to-face with someone or screen share right there and then because they need to show something on the screen because we're building products and they're tangible. But, again, this is not really true. You can very, very easily record something, Loom, quick screenshot, quick annotation, show it to someone in the document. It's there. Everyone can see it. 30 people aren't going to ping the same the same developer and tell them that they need to make this change. It's all centralized, all visible for everyone. And it's kind of quick and simple to use, and that's about it. And so like we feel that this once again gets rid of a lot of meetings, a lot of synchronous communication where you get a whole bunch of people together to review the product in the room at the same time. It's like it can be done asynchronous really well. It allows other people to chime in, to see what each other are saying, to comment on it. So it's kind of pretty healthy and it works well for us. And then finally is sort of action over discussion. And this is kind of, I think, one of the traps that I really fell into in my early days at GitLab is I would kind of write these long things about how I've been thinking about this or that, maybe as you would in a meeting or in a discussion with someone. And there was generally never a conclusion to them or a suggestion or a specific, this is actually what I propose that we do about it. And this is the sort of trap you can fall into in written culture, is not being sort of direct and action oriented. And I'll kind of give you an example of this. Like I have this sort of thoughts document that I have, and this is some thoughts that I had on a particular feature that we're going to be shipping. And I was able to enrich it with some information. There's basically a summary. There it is, discussion, blah, 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 blah. But at the end, it's like very, very important. Here's the proposal. This is what I feel that we should do, rather than just leaving it up in the air. And that's where the conversation then gravitates towards, rather than this never-ending stream of should we, shouldn't we. I've been thinking about this long-winded documentation. And being able to make sure that you're, and this is something that I feel, when I've seen new people joining the company that don't necessarily get, is they might share their thoughts, but they actually don't really share conclusion or action around them. And it's really, really important to do that in a written culture, because you can easily get followed down the sort of rabbit hole of just writing stuff for the sake of writing it. Whereas, we obviously need to take action on what we do. So yeah, those are the sort of three kind of pillars that I wanted to talk to you about, and kind of see, I think I was about on time. So I'm more than happy to have some questions and discussion around anything.
Well, thank you so much, Mike.
Okay, I have one question. Maybe I start. Mike, you mentioned effective writing skills.
Yeah.
Any tips of like what does it mean to you first of all, and then also if you have any tips or resources of how to get better at that, because I guess it's a very essential skill.
So this is a great question, and it's something that I nearly spoke a lot longer about, but to be honest, I don't have all of the answers for it right now. But I strongly believe that as a result of what we're seeing, that writing will become a critical skill for the future of work, in the same way that, you know, people who were good at meetings did really well in the days gone by when we used to be able to hug one another. And so I think people need to, number one, is learn how to write effectively. And an example of this, is something that I use quite a bit, is Hemingway. It's it's a web kind of editor app thing that effectively analyzes your what you write, and basically tells you to make it more Hemingway-like and trim it down, and to not write long convoluted sentences. And you know, this is also a particular challenge for non-native English speakers in an English environment. And this is where I feel that it's not just about writing, and it's about the richness of the sort of document or whatever it is that you're putting together. And this is why I kind of bring tools like Loom in. I bring richness in terms of imagery and graphs into the document. And so you need to be able to express yourself, A, with words, but secondly, to be able to use kind of aids that are basically nonverbal to back that up, if that makes any sense.
Mike, I think it's very, Carl had like a really interesting question. Carl, you're on mobile. I can try to unmute you so that you have an experience like asking the question yourself. So let's see how this works. And so you should be now unmuted, but maybe like you're on mobile, so I don't know how that will work out for you. Carl, you can ask your question now.
Yeah, I have a poor internet connection, but I put my question into the chat to everyone. So if no one can hear me, maybe they can read the question. Meetings have one advantage, and that's that you can almost like elicit direct response out of whoever is in the meeting, and almost like put them in a spot, provided of course they are prepared and they can give valuable feedback. And but meetings are not always possible, so I was wondering what you guys do to get the same type of proactive response from using other channels and other mechanisms apart from meetings.
Okay.
Perfect.
Kan
Thank you
ek
so
jou
much.
in Afrikaans antwoord? I think Charles is from my native South Africa, if I got the accent right. Good question. And I think, you know, this is also one of the reasons why that not meetings work particularly well for this, because in those documents, people who I've seen not participate in these active meetings can actually contribute in written form, in Loom, in other forms. And so in general, we try not to have these meetings and these types of putting people on the spot in meetings, because we get that same input through asynchronous written communication. And so generally, you know, the meetings that we have, if you look to my calendar, those group meetings, there are only 3 or 4 people ever in those meetings, except for the team one. And once again, the team one is very much about, you know, people just saying how they're doing, what's going on. You know, we've got this guy who lives in Sweden on a farm with this massive lake, and it's beautiful, and he'll talk about his day and his fire that he made and stuff like that. And it's really less about like getting things done in that meeting. The real getting things done, the real opinions happen around that in the documentation, in the conversations that we have, and not really in the meetings. We kind of find that as soon as you go above 3 or 4 people, that kind of sort of collaborative meeting just falls down completely. And so we really try not to have them at all.
Good question, though. Richard, I think your question is like this: only for quick questions like Slack. What do you do, Mike, if a question escalates into discussion? How to move it into like a document and stop the discussions without, like, I will elaborate a little bit more, without being rude, you know, and without like cutting off people?
Yeah. Well, read Radical Candor a little bit for good advice on how to do some of these things. But yeah, I won't lie to you, it does happen. It's easy to ask those kind of quick questions, and then something will just be in customer support. We have a customer support channel, and someone say, "Oh, someone's asking about this. I don't really know the answer," and then all of a sudden it can start to unwind into something bigger. And just generally, we try and, like, someone has to take responsibility to putting their foot down and saying, "No, okay, let's actually go and write a document, write a whatever it is about this. Is it a feature request? Is it a particular bug that we really need to escalate? Like, go and write a case for it, and let's see what happens." But we don't have this one. I think Alice introduced us as earlier as being, really knowing what we're doing in terms of remotes. Like, this area is so nascent as well. We're figuring it out. And to be honest, this happens, and I don't have great solutions for it. We try and lock it down, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Okay, cool. I would suggest maybe we continue with the Luke then, and we will come back to all the questions that have been posted so far after the second presentation, and then we'll have like more like a second perspective as well to the questions. So Luke, let me unmute you. Oh yeah, you're unmuted already.
Thank you.
Yeah. You are a presenter.
Awesome. Thank you. Cool. I think you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So it's going to be tough to top Mike's presentation, but I think we're going to be talking about very similar things. What Mike said makes a lot of sense. I really like the written over verbal. Maybe we're not as strict with it at Hotjar, but it's definitely something that is very important to keep in mind, that working remotely is not the same as working in an office environment. Not massively different, but it's good to keep in mind that there are some things that you have to rethink slightly. So thank you, Mike, for sharing that in your session. What I want to focus on a bit now is maybe more of a product manager challenge. Let's say that I'm going to be talking about aligning product teams in a remote environment. And you might have heard of John Doerr. Marty Kagan also quotes John Doerr as well, something that Mike mentioned before. So, like, the one of the top 5 differentiators of like truly great ventures is one of the differentiators is that a lot of successful companies seem to have this this culture of people ownership by the teams, of a bottom top approach to product management versus a top down approach. And as he highlighted really well, it's the teams having teams of missionaries, not mercenaries. Which means that you're driven by passion, you're driven by the long run. You're going for the marathon. These are like some of the most important traits of successful companies, as opposed to being just opportunistic, thinking in the short term, looking at competitors and all that. But to have a good team of missionaries in place, you need to make sure that there is a strong vision in place for the whole product, and of which teams can build their own vision for their own products. Obviously, a good vision, a very strong vision, is something that puts its users first, its customers first. But more importantly, and what I want to focus a bit on today, is that this vision is really well understood by all of the team. And all of the team, I don't mean just the product managers, I also mean the engineers, the designers, people in customer success, people in support, so that everyone can row the boat in the same direction, right? So before I jump into it, just a quick introduction about me. My name is Luke. I've been working as a product manager at Hotjar for the past 2 years. At Hotjar, we're just above 100 team members now. We are in different time zones. We've got people based in Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Yeah, I've been working as product manager for 2 years. It was my first remote gig, so there was a bit of a change, but to be honest, I adapted really well to it, and it's something that I love nowadays. So I will find it very difficult to move back once I'm so used to working in a remote environment. Apart from work, I also like to travel, obviously, when I can. Currently, I like to grow my hair even more because I can't even go to the hairdressers. Yeah, and when I get the chance, I like to do some bird watching, photography, and also I like doing like DIY, some projects going on. When I have the time, it's been a while since I updated the blog. Actually, I've got a blog called Short Curly Products, and in general, I love to meet other product managers, other product people, designers, and just chat about the challenges. So obviously, if you'd like to have a chat after this presentation, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I think that's the best place where you can reach me. So yeah, back to the to communicating the vision in a remote environment. I don't think, like, when it comes to communicating the vision, what I will be saying today is not strictly entirely true to only remote companies. It's also true to other companies. Okay, so these things are so useful, but I think this is even more important in a remote environment, because in general it is a bit more difficult, the remote environment, to understand what other people are thinking, what information they already have, since you're not speaking to the people like on a day-to-day, maybe by the water fountain, etc. But more especially at this time when maybe people are working maybe in a forced remote environment. It can be quite a busy environment, so there are even more distractions. It's in general maybe a bit more difficult period to focus at this particular time. So obviously we need to just keep that in mind, and this is why we need to think of, yes, we do have one vision, which we're working on, which we're following, but we need to make sure that we're communicating it in an effective way, such that people are really bringing it into their heads, right? And they can action it, work on it on a daily basis. And the first tip that I'd like to share today, I've got a few tips, hopefully, that it won't take me more than 10 minutes to go through this. But I think the first tip, that's the one thing that really is really important, and something that Mike also touched on in the previous conversation, is that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So by picture here, I don't necessarily mean picture, but also videos. But whenever we the number one, the biggest learning is that if you're talking about vision, if you're talking about something that's not really tangible, you need to make it a bit more relatable to people. You need to make it a bit more real. So obviously, in such an environment, making that in a picture format, in video, video recordings to maybe explain it better, will make it even easier. And I'll give you an example of how we've seen this at Hotjar. One of the co-founders a couple of years ago created this. It was quite a high fidelity prototype of like this 3-4 year 5-year vision of the product, and he basically recorded it and just was explaining, going through this high fidelity prototype, etc. If you ask any engineer in the company today, any designer whatsoever, everyone understand, everyone immediately clicks, everyone immediately understands. You know, when you refer to it, everyone knows what you're talking about, and it is like super. That was to me like a really good example of what a good communicate, you know, what's good communication about a vision should look like, right? It's stuck in people's heads, and yeah, they immediately can start talking about it. So definitely something that is really important. Making things, you know, in pictures and videos is definitely much better. If for things that obviously videos might not be, maybe for example, I was in a scenario where I did not have a designer at the time. So what I tried doing at the time is, okay, let me see if I can replicate maybe like a picture by painting a very rich document. I can tell you it's definitely not better than a picture. Just make sure that when you're writing these long documents, although it was quite successful, so I wouldn't say that these sort of like documents, strategy documents, etc., are completely useless. It's definitely nowhere close to having something enriched with pictures and with videos and with prototypes. But one thing which was really interesting, and I've now taken it very much on board, is that detailed docs, whilst they might not be as engaging as pictures, and whilst you might have to repeat certain things to people for things to get in, one thing that I really found to not be helpful, especially in a remote environment, is our like mission statements. Really vague, high level, you know, awesome sounding inspirational mission statements. I think they serve their purpose, but when it comes to communicate at a product manager level, when it comes to communicating them down to your squad, trying to come up with like an inspirational mission statement, whilst it has its advantages to people like engineers, designers, people, you know, stakeholders in support, they're going to start seeking something more tangible. So this is another thing that I've seen that didn't work really well. And so yeah, those are like from, you know, when sort of like techniques how to communicate, different techniques of how you can put like visionary ideas in people's heads. But in all of these, and Mike also, you touched on it, and there was a question on this, I think it is extremely important that when writing these documents, when explaining over video recordings, when showing pictures, when whatever you're doing, you need to make sure that you spend that extra effort to make sure it is well articulated, and it is and what you're writing, what you're explaining, can really communicate well to the people on the other side. Now, we are all really intelligent people, right? So we've got really amazing people on our teams, but I think what I like to tell myself in the background is that, yep, everyone has a brain, but nobody's in mind. So, you know, I really need to make sure that whatever I'm writing, it's not coming from in here, but it's coming, you know, it's obviously it has to come from in there, but it's not, it cannot be something that I only can understand. Other people need to understand it. And so Mike mentioned tools that can help in this regard, but I think there is one thing that I found to be really helpful, and that is getting feedback. So as an example, I was writing a book, well, not a book, but a long document, 6 pages, 7 pages long, about like what the next steps of my squad, of, you know, why are we doing this and all that. And at the time, basically I was writing additional detail in that document that wasn't needed. So I decided, okay, this is a long document. I'm not sure if people are gonna understand it. So I went to my director. I went to another product manager of another squad to ask for feedback, right? And basically getting that feedback, making sure you take in that feedback, you analyze it, and you see what are the things that you can change, keeping an open mind. That is what I found, at least, to be very helpful in writing documents that are really, articulated well and can help people understand what you're trying to say better. So this is all about writing, but I'll touch on some other things that maybe you don't normally think about when writing vision documents, strategy documents, etc. When you're communicating the longer term, is making sure to basically expose what you've written, what you're talking about, in the right places at the right time. So think of this as marketing your product, right? Sure, you might, if you have a product and you're going to market it, sure, you're going to show some ads at the time to get some to get some visibility, but at the end of the day, we know what like a lot of ads do to us. We just get blinded. We just get blind to ads. So what you need to do is to really make sure that you embed these documents, these maybe snippets of the documents, not the whole things, in spaces, in places that when that people will access when they need to refer to them. So think about like confluence spaces. So when someone is looking at, maybe like the North Star architecture of like, where we'd like to head from a technical point of view, might also be a good idea to also have the product vision somewhere close by, so they can, relate back to, so they can go back to it and relate how this links to the longer term. Think about team Trello boards. If you use Trello, for example, snippets, the important snippets of these documents, you can maybe embed them there. One thing which is really important also is onboarding flows. Think about when you are onboarding new people, when you are getting new people on the team, this is probably prime time where you need to make sure that people get access to these documents. So making sure, so like one of my tips is put whatever you have in an accessible place that people can use. And last thing that I'll talk about is that ultimately we are still the vision ambassadors, right? We are still the ambassadors for the vision of our product, and so by doing all that, it doesn't mean that you are you don't need to communicate with your team. This is still a really important part of our jobs as product managers, and we need to make sure that in whatever ways we're working, if we're running grooming sessions, for example, we start by focusing on the outcomes rather than on the stories, and we tie those outcomes to the vision, and then you can refer to it. Listen, if you want more information, it's in that document that's in our confluence space, for example, if you want a refresher, things like that. So basically just keep on repeating little bits of your strategy, of your vision in opportune times, until basically people are fed up of hearing about it. So yeah, in summary, these are my tips. Pictures are better than words. They're definitely much better than longer documents that give like a lot of detail, but these documents are actually better than just vague mission statements or really vague stuff. So you need to hit the right note there, and when you're writing these, when you're preparing these documents, these videos, these screen shares, whatever, you need to make sure that you really understand what people on the other side want what they need to know, what they already know, so that you can articulate it better. You can communicate what you're saying, what you'd like to communicate in a better way, and always remember to get feedback to perfect whatever you're writing, whatever you're recording. And if you've done all this, making sure you place them all in accessible places, and yeah, just keep on repeating that vision until people are sick of tired of hearing it. That's it from my end. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you. I just like to have like a short question follow up. Like you say, like ask your team for feedback, share these learnings, translate the vision. So how do you actually do this? Like, do you write on Slack, hey team, this is like general channel, this is the learning cool articles that I have like read so far. How do you like, you know, do you translate the vision like every stand up? I don't know, do you actually have stand up, you know, like something like that?
Mm-hmm. So
How do you
in the
do that?
beginning, this is what in the beginning, like when I was starting to getting used to remote, still not an expert, by the way. When I was getting used to it, this is what we used to try, used to speak to, you know, get feedback from 5-6 different people, you know, maybe right in the squad, hey folks, I've got this document. In reality, what ended up happening most of the times is that, you know, like, the more people you ask, there's also like people are going to feel obliged to give feedback, so you're going to get more nitpicking sometimes. So I think the trick is to pick 2 people, well, 2 or 3, depending on the situation, right? But a specific set of people, and you handpick them rather than sharing on a general channel, because if you share on a general channel, you're gonna also get people who are just watching it, they're gonna click on it, they're gonna read it, that document's not finished, they're gonna get a different view of than what you'd like to communicate at the end of the day, maybe because obviously you haven't refined it yet, and there's gonna be the danger that you're communicating something completely different, or when you come to communicate it, people have already seen it, they think they know what you want to say, but in fact they've understood something else. So yeah, I would always handpick like two people. I'll try to avoid going more than 2.
Okay.
And to also iterate on Mike's point, make sure that this feedback is on the document itself and not in Slack.
Okay. Okay, cool. Ben, you had a question? Would you like?
Yeah, sure. Can ask it. So I can totally second what you said, Luke, and especially this like circulating to selected people those in-depth documents. And from my experience, you also learn when writing those documents, that's actually one of the most valuable part, because you come up with like you put on your thoughts, and then you're like, oh yeah, how do we do this, how do we do that, and then you rephrase this again and again. And I've done this with in different contexts, and I always did it differently in terms of structure, like what to include. And I wondered whether you might have anything where you say, oh, this is our best practice, this is what we always include, this is what we learned over time, what to include and how to structure those documents.
So in terms of structure of the whole document, I wouldn't say there is like a particular structure that we use, but one thing that we like ask a lot ourselves, and like the authors of the documents, we always ask the question like why. And whenever like what are you trying to achieve at the top, and then when you're looking at the details, like why are you saying this? You're saying that we want to be in this position where maybe our product solves this problem for our users, and the most important question there that we always ask is why. Like, why do you think this is the case? And like it sort of builds that mentality that whatever you write needs to be backed by facts, by data, etc. So yeah, I hope
And you
that
don't
answers
have
your
like,
question.
Look, you don't have like, for example, certain limitations. For example, I mean, I could totally see like, if there are, I don't know how many product managers are right now like in Hotjar, but you know, you have like 5 to 6 product managers, and they each of them write like 6 pages, you know, documentation on like for one, I don't know, like kind of like a future or vision of the squad, and then it kind of like it multiplies, right? There's a lot of stuff to read. So for a director of product would have like to read like 36 pages of like just dedicated to the like, you know, certain feature of like a product team. Is there like a limitation? So for example, hey, for press release, or like for just for release, just short update, not more than like, I don't know, like 1 page. Do you have some kind of this rules? Mike, it's also a question to you. Do you kind of like limit your contributors to, you know, like wording in order to actually create like cognitive load for the team members?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very, very good point. And in fact, recently, since we've been growing, I think before, when we were a bit of a smaller team, we used to go like for the longer documents, also, you know, like to explain the rationale behind certain decisions to everyone. But when you start growing, like some of that needs to give, and this is why feedback becomes, you know, feedback from people who are, you know, higher up, that have, I say higher up, that have an overall picture to really identify and to give you feedback on what's really important for the rest of the organization to know, and also like from someone who is another part of the organization. So this is why, as you grow further, I think feedback becomes more and more important. And what I mentioned before, like when I wrote a 6-pager, when you know, at the time when we were writing 6-pager documents, recently we've been cutting them down to 1-pager. One maximum 2 pages.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mike, do you have like you use slide for documentation, so there it's like very easy to understand, like when you, as soon as you start scrolling quite like long, then it's probably time to stop. But is there like some kind of like convention behind that?
No, I mean, it depends on what you're writing. We do have sort of templates for all of these types of things. We have quite a substantial template library, and all of those templates are continually being iterated on to make them more concise, more even richer in some environments where the output might not be rich enough. And then we do absolutely try and, when we're broadcasting that out, try and synthesize those down into much shorter updates, even sort of Slack-like updates where people don't even, you know, need the details, and then we'll reference them back to documents in Slide where they can go back and sort of find more information on them. But yeah, we try. We don't always get this balance right. Sometimes our updates are too verbose. Other times we literally just had this problem where they were getting too verbose, and now they've gone sort of the other way where they're too terse. And so it's always about finding that balance, and you will sort of swing in and out of it.
Okay, thank you so much.
And
yeah,
I've got to go in a few minutes, so I've got the little one to put to bed. So okay. I don't know if we wanted to maybe try and catch some of the last questions, and then I can kind of hand over to the last questions of Luke.
Okay, cool. Then the problem that I have like with remote is, you know, based on this like on the book of Power of Moments from Chad and Dan Heath. So how do you actually manage this, like the special moments in the organization? It could be like anything like onboarding or like, you know, celebrations. As you have said, like remote didn't really work that well. So how do you tackle that cultural aspect, you know, creating of special moments in the company?
Mm-hmm. Great question. We have quite a few special moments. For example, when someone new joins the team, they have to write like a document about themselves and fill it with imagery. And every time someone joins, it's always this amazing experience where you're coming, you're reading this person's life story, and they've got images inside of it, and you know, you'll see all of their heads on the document, the presence, and it's like every time someone joins the company, there is a special moment that happens asynchronously like that. For one. Number two is we meet up in person quite frequently. So we are a smallish team, and actually pretty much 4 times a year we'll have small offsites, and these are really special moments for everyone to get together. We're small enough to find very large houses that we can rent rather than hotels, and we'll cook together, we'll eat together, we'll socialize together, we'll have these spontaneous moments of ideation, of talking about our strategy together, and we try and make sure those still happen, and Like GitLab do this every 9 months because their scale, to get 2,000 people to a venue is quite insane. But they also encourage people to fly around within and amongst their teams, and they will pay a stipend for travel and try to also create this sort of serendipity. So remote also isn't like never seeing anyone and just being in your mother's basement and writing like these really long verbose documents. There has to be personality to the business too. And we do this in other ways where we will have like games evenings or over remote and things like that to try and connect people in interesting ways.
Cool.
But yeah, if you'll excuse me, I do have to run because I've got to help my wife put my boy to bed. I saw there were a few unanswered questions. If you want to hit me up on Twitter or on LinkedIn, I'll be more than happy to answer them and talk about them. Maybe on Twitter in public so people can see the answers.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Mike. I know that you're also hiring a product manager. So if somebody is interested, please reach out to Mike directly, either on LinkedIn or Twitter, as said. So thank you so much, Mike.
We literally just closed that. We literally just closed that position.
Okay.
We are hiring other positions as well. So keep it out. But I know I showed a lot of screenshots of slides, and I wasn't trying to promote the company and just trying to promote good, effective working practices for remote people. So yeah, if you're interested in the company, sure, but that's not my intention.
Okay. All right.
Luke, thanks for the great talking, everyone. Thanks very much. Sorry, I have to run. Bye.
Bye, Mike.
Bye, Mike.
Luke, maybe you can answer this question
Sure.
regarding the special moments. What are the special moments of Hotjar that you have?
So yeah, so a lot of what Mike said, we also do at Hotjar. One other thing, when we do have we have a monthly company meeting where all of the meeting goes on a call, okay, and basically we have things like, for example, the very first 5 slides of the company are dedicated to celebrate life moments of people. So like not related to work. Someone bought a new house, someone had a child, someone graduated in a course or something. So we have those things. We do have every week on Friday an optional weekly release meeting. A lot of the company actually attends, and basically in this weekly release updates, the squads go through what they've achieved in that week, and sort of like it's a time to celebrate like what's been achieved in terms of sprint work and maybe like projects that have been going on for a while. And this is everyone in the company doing it. As we grow in size, obviously it becomes a bit more difficult. In fact, we've become a bit more stricter in terms of what we share. It's something that's released, takes less than 5 minutes. These sort of rules to keep up time efficiency, obviously in an hour, to go through 15 squads, it's quite a feat. So yeah, so a lot of these things, even when someone onboards, they for example go through like a support onboarding, we call it. So anyone that's hired at Hotjar needs to spend any time from 2 days to a week, depending on the role, with the support team. So shadowing as someone from the support team. If you're an engineer, you spend 4 days shadowing the support team, and once that's done, we sort of like again in the company meetings we celebrate that these people have graduated from the support onboarding. These little things that I find make a difference. We also celebrate things like people have been with us for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, etc. So, yeah.
And how do you celebrate it? Do you organize like a Zoom meeting, or like do you gather together like at some physical location?
No, we do this. So every month we do a company meeting over Zoom, and every week there's a weekly release update where there's some celebration, not just weekly releases, but also like smaller bits here and there. Every 6 months we meet up. We used to meet up more often, like 4 times a year, but as we grow in size, it's becoming a bit more difficult. So we meet twice a year, June and December, to just chill out as a team, and we use it mostly for alignment purposes.
Cool. Ben, would you like to help me out regarding some questions that are there like unanswered yet, so that we like?
Yeah, I think the last one is from Ed. There's two questions. So the first one is, how do you make sure those principles are applied by everyone and that people care and spread and it scales within the company?
So I'm assuming that you're talking about effective sharing of the vision, of like effective documentation, essentially. Is that right?
I guess, yeah.
Yes, perfect. So I think so before this was more ad hoc. Now, as you know, we have directors of product directors. They're sort of more in charge of making sure that these principles are followed across different squads, and there is like a sense of uniformity. We try not to be too prescriptive, but there are some high-level principles that normally they're built like a squad starts doing things slightly different. So let's say, for example, I'm just going to give an example not related to the vision, but there was a squad at Hotjar where, as we started ramping up our testing, the number of tests that we run in the product, there was one squad who started. Every different squad used to communicate results in different ways, and the approach of one squad stood out. So automatically sort of like a lot of the other squads started copying until there was like we've sort of reached a consensus, and then that's where the directors pick it up and say, okay, like this has worked well, let's use this as a template. And it's the same applies to documentation. Like it's the role of the leaders, basically. And I think the second question there is, do you think companies would benefit and be willing to pay for employee training on these subjects? This is really interesting. So I think what I love at Hotjar is that we have two budgets for learning. We have one budget which needs authorization. So if you're going on a course related to product management, etc., that's more focused on your job, on things that help you directly in your job. But we also have like each employee has forgot the name of it, but a budget basically to improve yourself, and you can use it to buy books, to attend courses, etc. And you're completely free to spend this on educational material as you like. So but I think the most important part of it, obviously, to realize that you need training in that regard, is to make sure that the one-to-ones are effective, and that people are and that people are giving feedback and saying, listen, look, you need to maybe improve on the way you articulate certain things. So maybe this helps. Again, the role of leadership really starts to show its importance, basically.